Hi everyone, this is Jim. Had another interesting game at my club championship this year. I thought I would share it with you. This is my round 5 game. After 4 rounds, I was at 2.5 points out of 4, which is an okay score for me, probably about par for the course. My rating is a little bit above average when you have all the players in the club playing together in a big section like this, in a single open section, which they do for the club championship. So I'm doing okay so far. The score group I'm in had about 10 players in it, and I was around number 6. So the pairings could have gone either way. That means in that one score group, there were players who were higher rated than me, as well as players who were lower rated than me. And it turns out I got paired against one of the higher rated players, but if some of them had taken buys, I might have been paired against a lower rated player. So I didn't really know what was going to go, what the case would be until I got there and saw who I was paired up against. And actually, I was paired up against not only a stronger player, but a player I'd never faced before. So he's not that new to the club. He's been coming there for 3 years or so. He doesn't play in all the tournaments. It just so I just haven't had the chance of playing him before. So it was interesting to play a new player. I started off with D4. He goes D5, and also a strong player. 2025 is a pretty good rating. Let's see, I continue with the C4. He goes C6. I go, yeah, so plays the Slav defense. I play knight F3, which is the main move, and he plays knight F6, also the main move. And I play E3, which is not the main move, although it's a popular move. It's like the second choice there. If we back up, the main way to play the most popular move is with knight to C3. But this does allow a certain line called the note boom variation, where black takes here and pushes this pawn forward, the B pawn, takes here and pushes the B pawn forward after knight C3. And this can lead to black getting a steamroller of pawns over in the queen side. It's actually quite a dangerous position, although if white plays it well, white should come out okay there, even better. But it's a tricky one to play. And so I play simply against the Slav. I play with E3. And this most often leads to the Moran variation, which is something I like. I play the Slav myself, so I like the Moran variation from either side. It's the kind of position which is equal, pretty much, so maybe white doesn't go for it as often. I think you more often see anti-Moran variations from white these days, but it's an equal position where both sides have interesting chances, so I don't mind it so much. Anyway, he plays a bit of a rare move here, although it turns out to be just a kind of a move order wrinkle. The way to get to the Moran variation would be to play E3 first, E6 after E3. Then I would develop the knight. He would bring the knight out, and I would go bishop to D3, and that would often lead to the Moran variation. We get to this similar position, but he does it in a different move order. He does knight BD7 first. So, immediately I start to think, is there some way to exploit that? Is this somehow weak? But it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be this particular move order is fine. I mean, the move to try and exploit something like this would be queen to B3, putting more pressure on the center, and knight to C3. Knight to C3 is part of the plan anyway. But, because he's got this pawn on B7 solidly defended, the queen move doesn't come with tempo, and so he has time to play E6 anyway, and so everything is fine. So that's what happens here. I go knight C3, he plays E6. I didn't bother with the queen move because I didn't see any advantage in it. And I play bishop D3. And now this is a position where we could go for the Moran variation. That would go like this. Black would take, and I would take back, and black would kick the bishop, and I would drop back. And then black would play either with A6, that's the way I play it, or sometimes with bishop B7. Those are equally popular ways to play it. And black has some dynamic chances here on the queen side. White has chances in the center. And it's an interesting and double-edged position, so interesting for both sides. But he didn't play that. He just played bishop to D6. So once again, a bit of an unusual move, and I'm starting to try and think a little harder about how to punish this. I could play E4 here. In fact, the chess engine and the opening book both give E4 as a possible move to play here. Also, just queen C2 seems to be good here. I didn't like the idea of playing e4 before I've castled, but sometimes you have to be brave to take advantage of these opportunities. So I just castled. I was a little worried he might try e5 here, but I thought this would be okay. There's this trick here I wanted to show you. E5 looks like it comes with the threat of pushing the pawn forward and forking those two pieces, but you can throw in c takes d5 here, and now he can't fork those pieces. You can just take that pawn because you have two. It's important you have two pieces defending that square, and he only has one piece attacking it. So he can't push. He has to take back with either the pawn or the knight. If he takes with the pawn, then you can get this kind of IQP position, and should be good for white. So I would be happy to play that. So I decided it was okay to castle, and he didn't try anything like e5. He just castled himself. And now, once again, it seems that queen c2 is the move. I'm always a little reluctant to play this queen c2 move, because I always like the idea of dropping the bishop back to c2 and putting the queen on d3. It feels like if the queen is on c2, threatening to mate, or setting up the idea of a mate threat on h7 at some point in the future when it's not defended. So it feels like if you put the queen on c2, it's kind of in the wrong order. It wants to change places with the bishop. But that seems to be a good move here. It defends the center, supports the e5 push, and puts some pressure on that pawn. So yeah, this is the line in the book, I guess. I go here. He might take immediately, and then I take. And this is a position where white keeps some kind of opening advantage. But e4 is also a move that's in the opening book. It's just not the most popular move. And he takes. He could take either way. Both choices are about equally popular. He could take this way and then play with e5. And that seems to be a decent position for black, although white still has some slight edge. Or as in the game, he can take this way, and then I take with a knight. And this is actually the way I've seen it more often, but the other way of taking seems to be good as well. And now, yeah, he continues to take. This is typical. And now I was really expecting the move knight f6. And he didn't play that. He played h6. And I was even more surprised when I looked this up afterwards. And h6 is the most popular move in the database at this point. So I'm not entirely sure why you would need h6 before knight f6. Maybe in the immediate knight f6 might run into bishop to g5. And so this is just putting a stop to that idea. Yeah, I guess that's probably it. It's interesting, though. I hadn't really expected this h6 move. And, well, once again, I had to stop and think. So is there some way to exploit this? Kind of the next natural move is bishop back to c2, because he's going to play knight f6 anyway, most likely. But it felt a little strange to be moving that bishop without being asked. So I thought for myself, well, is there some other move I could play that would be useful? And eventually I came up with the move rook to e1. So later I looked this up. It turns out bishop back to c2 really is the main move. I guess, I thought, well, he didn't necessarily have to go to f6. The knight might come around to b6 and then the bishop on c2. Maybe it's not so useful, but, I'll still have this battery, and maybe the battery's even stronger with the knight out of play and an immediate threat. So just dropping the bishop back to c2 would have been fine there. Another move I could have played, which I thought about and rejected, is bishop to e3. I didn't like this because I thought, well, first of all, he's got knight f6 with tempo, so I have to drop the bishop back, and then he could try knight g4. But there is an idea in this position. Whenever the knight leaves that f6 square, then I can play queen d6 right away, and he doesn't have time to immediately take this bishop. If he wants to keep the knight here, then he's got to play a move like f5, and then I can just drop that bishop back, and that seems to be okay for white as well. So all these moves are okay, just things that I rejected, and I didn't have to reject them. They could have played them. So I went rook e1, he went knight f6, and now we've kind of gotten into a rare place in the database where we're just out of the book. We'd been in a rare line for a while, so now we're just out of the book. And but nothing has gone wrong. I would say neither side has really made a mistake so far. We're just pointing out there are different ways to play it. It doesn't imply that any one of those ways is much better than what we played. So I drop my bishop back to c2 now, and he plays c5. That's pretty natural with the Slav. You either want to break with c5 or with e5 to free up some path for this bishop. Now the bishop maybe could come around like this, but you've got to open up some lines for that light squared bishop. And this is a good way to do it. And here I played bishop e3. By now I had found this idea where if he goes with knight g4 to harass my bishop, I have queen d3. So I was no longer worried about that. I'd figured that out over the board. And here he plays queen c7. So all these are very solid moves. And I play the move h3, which turns out to be okay. I was thinking about, let's go back here. I meant to just go back one square. Yeah. Instead of h3, I was also at this point thinking, could I get away with this knight e5 move? It's kind of interesting, right? I'm trying to shut down tactics on this diagonal before they get started. But it is a pawn sack. But actually, and I just wasn't sure it was good, honestly. I thought about it, and I thought, who is that really good for me to sack a pawn like that? The chess engine likes this pawn sack. It says if black takes, which it doesn't recommend, then black can grab a pawn like this. And I saw this position. I was trying to figure out if there was some kind of discovery with the bishop. Like I could grab a pawn over here, I guess. But the chess engine says don't go for the discovery. Just play b3, because this pawn over here was hanging. That's kind of what I was seeing. I was seeing, bishop takes over here, queen takes over here, and black stays a pawn up, and his queen is active there. So instead of allowing that, just push that pawn forward. The queen drops back to get away from any discoveries there, and then my queen can come forward. So I've just dropped a pawn here, but what have I gained? I've gained the bishop pair, and I've gained a lot of pressure here. The queen is immediately pressuring the knight with ideas of bishop takes here. It wouldn't win a piece, but he can't take the bishop back for fear of losing the knight. And this bishop is still trapped behind the lines. I mean, it'll get out, but it'll take it a couple of moves. So even though white is a pawn down, the chess engine gives an advantage to white in this position. So that means there's very strong compensation for the pawn, and I should have been willing to play that. As I mentioned, after knight to e5, black's not required to take that knight, and in fact the chess engine recommends just playing b6 and just continuing on like this. So that would have been a good way for white to play here. But h3 actually turns out to be a decent alternative. I'm just getting the pawn out of the way of any discovery, so now I'm free to move that knight to other squares without losing a pawn here on h2. So he goes b6 now, and I go queen e2. So queen e2 is the first move that I would call an inaccuracy. It's not a blunder, but it's slightly inaccurate, and black actually equalizes. So up to this point, we've had a kind of typical position with a slight opening advantage to white, and after this queen e2 move, black is pretty much equal. So why is this not so great, or what are the better alternatives to keep the pressure? It's kind of a delicate thing to maintain that opening advantage. So here's the preferred line by the chess engine. This is just a really interesting line, I think. Queen d2. So queen d2. Well, the bishop is going to come here and threaten to take this knight off. So it's a little bit annoying. But let's go ahead and put that move on the board. That's the next move in the line. And what white does in this position is ignore that and go for the sacrifice here. And it turns out the bishop can't be taken. So this is just too bad. If he takes, queen takes, then, well, the rook moves to give the king a little bit of space here, so the queen doesn't come in here with mate after chasing the knight away, I guess. So anyway, this is best play according to the chess engine. Rook to e8 to give the king a little escape square there if needed. Knight to g5. Bishop to f8, dropping the bishop back to chase the queen away. Bishop to h7 check, throwing in the check first. King to h8. Queen takes f6, picking up the knight. Bishop to g7, saving the king from the check. And now knight takes f7 check. King takes bishop. Knight to g5 check. King to g8. And queen to g6. And we'll pause here. And that was, I don't know if that was all forced, but that was best play according to the chess engine. And white is still a piece down, right? I didn't get my piece back. He's got two bishops for the knight. He even has the bishop pair. But I did clear away all the pawns. There are no pawns in front of the king anymore. And all these squares are covered by the queen and the knight, and they just have to lift a rook up. And white is just winning in this position. There's no, well, I guess any defense here is going to involve some loss of material, although it's not obvious to me even from this position that is the case. I guess the big threat here, maybe it is obvious, the big threat here is breaking through immediately on e6. So you don't have to take two moves to bring the rook up and over. I can come directly to e6 and break in. Bring the other rook over too. So anyway, that's a winning line. So after queen d2, bishop b7, bishop takes h6. It's not safe to take that bishop, but you can take the knight. Knight takes f3. Bishop takes f3, rather. Pawn takes. And knight to h5. And this is given as a line that is better for white and keeping some slight opening edge, but black should survive this somehow as well. I mean, white has some weaknesses too, and if the attack isn't immediately breaking through, maybe there will be some problems down the road. White is a pawn up at the moment. It's 4 versus 3 here and 3 versus 3, but the pawns on the king side are kind of weak. Anyway, let's see. Is there a simpler way to maintain the opening advantage? There is, and that is just to take. And this is a move I did think about. And I just thought this would be kind of equalizing, so I was avoiding that move because I thought that would just be pretty simple. But let's see, he takes, I take, queen takes, and knight e5. And that's, you know, I get the knight on a good square, and his bishop is still blocked in by this pawn, although the bishop could come out along this diagonal. But maybe I'm just a little bit more active with this good knight here, and this is how to keep an opening advantage in this position. And so there's either the complicated way with queen d2 or the simpler way with pawn takes c5. But I thought pawn takes c5 was a little bit too simplifying and would lose the opening edge, but that was a mistake in judgment. So queen e2, and the position is about equal. He goes bishop b7. I go rook a to d1. All decent moves. He goes rook a to d8. And now I make the second inaccuracy so far in this game. Well, you can tell who's the stronger player, I guess. He hasn't made any inaccuracies. He's played some moves that were maybe not the most common in the database, but nothing that really gave me any kind of edge. And now I managed to play an inaccurate move. He's equalized, and now my next move, which I thought seemed pretty natural, actually gives an advantage to black. So what should I play here? Once again, I could play d takes c5, and that keeps that kind of opening edge. And you know, I kind of want to do something like that. I want to get this bishop out of the way and put the knight up here. The move I played was bishop back to c1, but maybe it's just too much of a retreating move. I mean, often it's a good idea to drop the bishop back and keep these lines open. And it is still looking out at the king side from that square, so I didn't think it was too bad. But well, we'll come to a line, I'll show you. So one idea was to take. Another idea was just to play b3, and that keeps things about equal. After bishop c1, black actually has an opportunity to gain an advantage, which he didn't take. So now he plays an inaccurate move. So 2,000 players are not perfect machines either. So he played queen c6 here, which is a nice move that puts a lot of pressure on me. But the best line, according to the chess engine, of this is this one. He takes on d4. I take back, and then he plays bishop to b4. Sorry, not bishop. Not bishop there. Bishop to b4. That's kind of an annoying move. It's poking at this rook here. I can't block with my bishop because my knight would be hanging. So I have to move the rook out of the way. Then the bishop drops back to c5. That's where I placed it at first. And now he's got an attack on that knight. And the best move, according to the chess engine, is knight back to f3. And so the material is equal here. So you might say, why does this amount to an advantage for black? Why is it shifted from an edge to white to an edge to black? Well, if you look at the pieces, this would maybe be equal if I had the moves b3 and bishop to b2 in, and my bishop were looking at his knight the way his bishop is looking at my knight. I mean, really, it's a very symmetric position, but I'm kind of 2 moves down, and I just put the knight on f3, and it's black's turn to move. So somehow black ended up gaining a couple of tempo in that line. So after bishop to c1, he could have taken and gone for that line. Instead, he went queen c6. So a slight inaccuracy, and now we're back to a position which is about even. But I have to say, this was an annoying move to face in an over-the-board game because there's always this pressure on the diagonal here now. And knight to h4 is a natural move that I would often play in these kind of positions. Get the knight out of the way, defend this pawn, and then maybe I can push the f-pawn forward. If I can get the f-pawn forward 1 or 2 squares, then the queen will defend along that second rank there, and that would be good. But in this case, knight h4, he could play g5 immediately, and I'm losing a piece or getting mated, so that's no good. The knight can't come back to this square until I move the rook out of the way. And, well, I could defend with queen to f1, but that looks really, really passive, you know, just bringing my queens backward. That's not the right idea. So how does white maintain an equal position here? Well, once again, the idea is to just go ahead and take here. He takes, and then bishop d2. So stopping exchanges on this file. Maybe the bishop will come out here. Just kind of taking my time. Actually, this is a position where the chess engine says you can live with this pressure for a while. Don't do anything radical, and just try and get your pieces out. Try and get them on good squares, and deal with this at a later time. And, you know, as long as the knight's there, there's no mate. So it's just uncomfortable to have that knight pinned in a way to that to the blocking of that diagonal. So, but that's how I should play it. So anyway, I kind of explained I didn't like the other alternatives. I didn't think of just ignoring the threat. So I came up with an active plan. And, you know, maybe it's in a, you know, it's not an accurate move. It's not a correct move. It's an actual blunder. It just loses a pawn. But it does give me some chances here. So it might be a kind of a decent practical move. But technically speaking, that's a blunder. He can just take that pawn. And he did take once. And then he dropped his queen back to d7. So that's not... well, that still keeps a winning edge. The point, we talked about this after the game. The point is that, you know, he doesn't have to take any chances. This pawn is not going away. It's isolated. It's going to be hard for me to defend because my knight is three moves away, 3 hops away from getting to a square that can defend it. Yeah, it's not even clear how I would do that. I guess I could go like this, 1, 2, 3, and get to the e6 square to defend it, or here to here, not e6, to e3 or to c3 to defend it. So he can, and his knight is already attacking it, so he can kind of overpower me on this by concentration of force on d4. But I thought I would have maybe some counterplay here with this pressure along the d file with that lineup of pieces. So anyway, it turns out he could have taken right away. So knight takes d5. My plan here was to play bishop e4 and try and exploit this pin. And he can't really unpin right away. If he tries to forcibly unpin, well, he can play this. Knight c3 is playable. I give up. He gives up the knight and then takes the bishop. But then the queens come off. And let's see, I can grab this bishop, and then to make this work, he can actually do this. I have a loose rook back here. I had seen actually some of this. So we can go for this line. Bishop here, check, king takes, and rook takes. And now I save this bishop. And he's gained a pawn and a rook, but he's given up two pieces. So I have two pieces for a pawn and a rook. And this is okay. Maybe black is a little better. Maybe white is okay. So that is not the way to refute this. But after bishop e4, just a simple move, rook fe8. And this is something I hadn't fully appreciated. But rook fe8 is just kind of difficult to deal with. It pins my bishop, so I'm no longer really threatening to take the knight. If I take the knight, he takes the queen. I take the queen, he takes the rook with check. Black comes out ahead in those exchanges. So queen c4 was given as the best move here. And then he can just drop his bishop back. He's unpinned. This is still adequately defended. I still have trouble bringing more force to bear on that square. And he can kind of slowly unwind from this position and just be a pawn up and actually have better pieces. The chess engine prefers black by more than 1 point in this position. So that would have been the best way to play it. Just take it, and then when I try the pin, just play rook f to e8. And, well, as you can see from this final position, black is also going to have to live with a pin for a while. But, well, as I showed or explained in that other position, the chess engine doesn't seem to be afraid of living with pins. It doesn't follow that always unpin recipe that I like to follow. Anyway, instead of going for those complications, he just dropped his queen back to d7. So I think also this is a good practical decision. It may be, you know, technically a blunder, but you know, he is going to be able to round up this pawn, and it keeps an advantage to black. So, so things are going okay here. Although, let's see, the chess engine says I should now play knight e5 and actually get close to an equal position. Knight e5, queen e7. Oh, queen e7, sorry. Knight to g4. And threatening his queen, so encouraging this exchange. But before the exchange, yeah, I guess that's the point. I can throw in knight takes f6 and then take back. And this is a position where he'll probably round up the pawn, but I have compensation in the form of his weaknesses on the king side. And notice we both have the bishop pair and the pair of rooks, so be kind of an interesting late middle game or end game with a lot of force. So that would be if I had played knight e5 there. That's the way to keep things more or less even. Slight edge to black maybe. But I played bishop to b3. I thought, well, he didn't take that pawn right away. Maybe I can hold on to it for a while. It is a passed pawn, and I can be annoying. But turns out that's just not a good move. This allows him to kick me around some more. So he goes rook f to e8, hitting my queen. I go queen to d3. And now he has this brainstorm, which is okay, although it complicated things a little bit unnecessarily. So he could have just taken here. This is best play according to the chess engine. Rook takes, and then grabbed the pawn. And notice that, that exchange pulled my rook away, so it's no longer, my queen, if it ends up here, will no longer be defended. So that's important because he's got bishop to h2 check. So, for example, if bishop takes, oh, well, I can't even play that. It's actually defended. Anyway, he can easily unwind from this position, having pulled the rook away and having these threats along the d file himself. I'm not going to get anything here. I can trade off the bishop. The knight comes there, but I can't take the knight. I guess that's the point because of bishop to h2 check. So so that would have been simplest. The move he played is just as good. Technically speaking, it's just a little more complicated. So he played b5 with the annoying threat of c4 there, forking my two pieces. And well, you can see why it's attractive with this pawn to c4. I'm no longer even defending it with my bishop, so He's just taking another piece away. And this knight is not able to defend the pawn, and now soon this bishop won't be able to defend the pawn. He's just trying to arrange the defense, or arrange the capture of that pawn in the most convenient way. So I decided to trade rooks at this point. I think this was a good choice, just so I can keep this force on the d file. But black is still winning through this section here. Let's see. And now I played queen c3. I had to. That came with check, but I did have to get away from this fork. And when I played this move, I was thinking, you know, the queen is looking at the knight there, and the bishop is threatening to take here, right? Once again, I could snag a pawn over on the king side like that. But he played c4, so that forces my hand. I can't do that immediately. I drop my bishop back to c2, and then he plays knight takes d5. So he finally grabbed that pawn at an opportune time, and I didn't have time to play any of my tricks. So, but I thought queen d4 was an interesting move. It seems to be one of the better moves for white. Going back to just trying to create pressure on the d file here, and at the same time, because he's moved these pawns forward, I'm looking at the b pawn, which is or the a pawn, which is undefended over there, and he was a little bit concerned about that, so he played the move knight to b4. He had some ideas here. Before we go on with the game, this is, like I said, still winning for black. The strongest continuation here is queen e7. And what this does, in this particular position, you know, I'm already piling up on the d file, and I have the idea of bringing the bishop here, which actually it kind of pins the knight. I mean, it's looking at the knight. Well, it's bringing more pressure to bear on the knight, and if the knight moves and I take the bishop, it pulls the queen away from defense of this pawn. So it's of the bishop here, rather, the bishop on d6. So it is a threat, but queen e7 starts the process of unpinning along the d file, and it also controls the e4 square, so I can't play bishop to e4 anymore. So that's just a good move, and it keeps that winning advantage for black. And black's winning advantage just consists of he has an extra pawn and he has active pieces. So you know, it's a decent position. Instead, he went knight b4. So while he's getting his knight away from any bishop to e4 check, or pin, any bishop to e4 pin is off the table now, and he's hitting my bishop, and he's setting up some tactics here. So there's ways to go wrong. If you want to look at this position, he's offering this guy, right? He's saying I can just have that bishop and he'll have this bishop, but this doesn't look so great, right? Queen takes d6. He can trade first, and then he can take on c2. And now I have to get my bishop into the game. Bishop to d2 is recommended by the chess engine, and he can just take here. And I take back. And so this is a position where it's an endgame with rook and bishop versus rook and knight, which is sometimes good for the side with the bishop. But black has the extra pawn, and he's also messed up my pawns on the king side. So should be a winning endgame for black. Although, you know, maybe it's not so simple. I would certainly play on. things could happen. Anyway, so I didn't grab the bishop here. Instead, I played the best move in the position, which is just dropping the bishop back to b1. And after this, it seems like, although black still has an advantage, it's no longer a winning advantage. So that win has kind of disappeared. It's what black is still better. He's still got the extra pawn, but somehow my pieces are a little better coordinated, and he still has some issues on this diagonal here, or on the d file, I mean. So here he went astray. Well, I don't know if I could say that, but let's look at some alternatives here on move 26. He could just bring the knight back. That was actually one of the top choices, and the chess engine says it keeps a slight edge. Another way for black to keep a slight edge is by going knight to d3. This is much more complicated. I was planning to take here. I spent a lot of time during the game calculating this. because there's lots of dangers here. So, for example, what if he tries bishop takes knight instead of just taking my bishop back? Then when I take here, he has this check, winning my queen, and you might think this is just awful for me, but it turns out after taking the queen, I have the same trick. I can take his queen, and in fact, this line I end up a piece up. So it's a tactic that backfires on black. So this is actually quite a double-edged position. It's not quite such a simple edge that black has here. So that's why maybe knight d5 would be the preferable move. But knight d3 is still keeping an advantage to black with this line. He doesn't try anything tricky. He just takes the bishop. Let's see, I get the pawn, and now he takes my knight. And I grab this bishop. And let's see, he can throw in this check. I can take the queen. Is that right? Oh no, he takes my queen. Yeah, he throws in the check and then he takes my queen. I take back. He takes my bishop. I take his bishop. And this is a position where black is slightly better, but white can probably hold the endgame. In fact, the material has equalized, and his only advantage is that I have these weak pawns that he can go after. Maybe he can even pick one up with rook c2. I don't know if I can defend them all, but I can counterattack his pawns. So an endgame where black has the advantage, but white has good drawing chances. So those are the moves. Probably, given those choices, knight d5 is a better choice because although it's a retreating move, it does keep all the force on the board. He still has his advantage of the extra pawn over here on the queen side, and the game will continue from there. But instead, he spotted a tactic here, kind of similar to the one I showed you already in that line. He took the knight, and I took back. And he's still okay here. He could follow up once again with knight to d3. That would be okay in this case. But the move he played instead was rook to e1. Oh, sorry, it was his move. He played the move rook to e1 check. And this move is a mistake. So here's your chance. Here's your tactical quiz for this video. What is white's best move here? And there's only one good move here. Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. Well, I'll show you the wrong answer first. If you step away, which is sometimes what you want to do, then he can just trade and he's still better. So this is not the right answer. This is good for black. No, the right answer is you can just take that and you can let him do his trick, right? He's going to play bishop h2 check. He's going to win your queen, but there's a problem here. The rook has been dragged to the e-file by that exchange, and this bishop sitting here on c1 is guarding the escape square of the king. So rook e8 is mate, and that is how the game ended. Actually, he knew that was happening. He was actually he was very gracious, I guess. He let me play that out because he played this move rook e1 check, and then he went for a walk. And by the time he got back to the board, I had figured this out and played rook takes e1. And he could have resigned, or he could have tried to play on. But playing on is there's not much here. Queen to c6 is the chess engine suggestion, and I would play bishop f4. You see my pieces come out. This bishop is keeping his knight at bay, and I just cancel that. I just have, let's go back to that position. I just have an extra rook here. So there's really nothing for black to play for there. So he just went ahead and played out the rest of the combination. I took, and he played the check. I took the queen, and I gave mate, and that's how the game ended. So anyway, a very fun game, kind of entertaining, and you could tell Black was playing really well there, but he just made that one tactical mistake, and then maybe one inaccuracy where he didn't continue with the moves that gave him the biggest advantage. But he did have moves that gave him an advantage almost all the way. So anyway, very solid game from Black there until the end. So that puts me at 3.5 points out of 5. So that means in the next round I will face another tough opponent. So anyway, I'll be back with some more coverage. I don't know if I'll do every game till the end. It's seven games in this tournament, but I'll at least do some kind of roundup at the end. So I will see you guys then. Bye.